Greetings, friends, once again. So, today, this is by request. I'm a subscriber on Substack, which you can follow me on Substack. The Druid Stares Back, and you're more than welcome to become a free or paid subscriber. But anyway, the subscriber Adrian by name shared with me somebody's, can't remember who it was, this post on Christian mysticism, like 10 essential texts or whatever, and said, you should do one of these. And so I said, hey, it's a good suggestion, and I will. So here it goes. It's going to be unconventional, though, as you probably would hope. And we'll see how it goes. So the first one I'm going to bring up is Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion, by my patron Saint William Blake. It's a really difficult text, this one. Of course, it's the first book I ever read by William Blake. Didn't understand almost anything. But what I did understand, I loved. And I've read it, I don't know how many times since. And I've taught a course on it a couple times. Once at a university and once online, maybe about a year ago. It's challenging. It's super challenging. But it's fruitful. And the thing is, this is William Blake's kind of redemption. His final work, and it's the perfect coda to his work, because if you go back to his, I think he was 30 or even younger, and he wrote The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. He was doing what Harold Bloom calls his agon with Emanuel Swedenborg, his struggle with the Father, right? Because he grew up in a Swedenborgian church. And I would go to a Swedenborgian church if they weren't all nuts. But, and I don't mean nuts by being Swedenborgian, but the ones I've encountered recently were very woke, which I'm not into. I'm not into that. But years ago, as a gardener, I worked for a Swedenborgian priest who was just lovely. And actually, I can't remember his name, but a lot of what I'm going to show you today probably goes back to him, because he gave me what he called an English mysticism care package one time. He gave me a bunch of books. William Law was one of them. I can't remember what else he gave me. Because I was really interested in English mysticism then, which, curiously, years later, my doctorate is basically in English mysticism. So here we go. I'm going to read just the beginning of the first couple lines of Jerusalem, which is a very long poem, because you can see what happened. What happened is Blake was arrested for sedition because he found a drunk soldier in his bushes and threw him out of his garden, and apparently the soldier said something about the king. He was drunk, and Blake must have said something like, well, the hell with the king, and which is, in those days was punishable by death. But he got off. And I think when he got off, kind of like with Dostoevsky, when he got out of execution, he had a new lease on life and a new understanding of forgiveness. That's what happened with Blake. Here's what Blake says here, the first few lines. Chapter 1. Of the sleep of Oro, and of the passage through eternal death, and of the awakening to eternal life. This theme calls me in sleep night after night, and every morn awakes me at sunrise. Then I see the Savior over me, spreading his beams of love, and dictating the words of this mild song. And it goes on from there, of course. Now, the thing is, it's when you read this book, it's like the way he does it is just so masterful with the cadences that he uses. That it's not really written in verse. Some parts are, but most of it's not. But it's written in a kind of, not really blank verse either, but it's got a poetic rhythm to it. But I guess Hopkins would call it a sprung rhythm, and parts of it you just feel yourself carried into some spiritual state of consciousness without even really knowing what the words mean half the time. And then you have to unpack it, but it's really masterful in that way. Pretty amazing piece of work. The next one I want to show you is, let me see if we can find the title page. Nice when I do this in these collected works. Maybe. Nope, the wrong book. Let's see. There it is. This is Henry Vaughan. I can't see what the book says. Silex, Scintillans, or Sacred Poems and Private Ejaculations, by Henry Vaughan Sillers. Henry Vaughan. Now, sorry about that. Henry Vaughan is one of the metaphysical poets, and I did my dissertation not on exactly the metaphysical poets, but I've written about all of them except for Richard Crashaw, so I could probably put together a book about it. I wrote in my dissertation. I wrote about him because I really wanted to find out. I mean, the reason I do writing projects is because I want to learn something about something. So, when I was in my dissertation, I really wanted to explore the writing of Henry Vaughan and his identical twin brother, Thomas. And Thomas was an Anglican priest and alchemist, and Henry was a poet and Paracelsian physician. He was a Hermetic physic, is what he practiced. And they're both steeped in Hermeticism, and you can see even in the work of Jakob Böhme. But really struck me when I was going through this, because when you do that, you have to read everything the person wrote, and everything, as much as you can anyway, about what is written about them. And what I realized as I was going through this book, and with his brothers as well, but it's more obvious in poetry, that there's this beautiful combination of Christian insight and mysticism, you can say, but also of nature, creation mysticism. The idea of the two books, the book of Scripture and the book of creation, both of which disclose the intentions of God, right? And, of course, Scripture. So these three things kind of get braided in this verse, and it's pretty extraordinary. Now, the thing is, to write about nature like he did, and when he did, was out of the ordinary. It wasn't, a lot of critics would say that Henry Vaughan was kind of a proto-romantic, because how nature's an important thing for the romantic poets. And he was way ahead of he was, I think this is published in 1650 and 1655, so he's way ahead of the romantics by 150 years. But it's extraordinary the way he combines this. Now, let me see if I can find one of the poems here. I guess I should have done this ahead of time. But you're stuck with me. Yeah, here, the sap. I could guess look at the sap. Maybe it's this one over here. Cock crowing. This is one of my favorites. There's a lot of good poems. He's got so many good poems. But in cock crowing, it's a perfect explanation of what I'm describing in this kind of braid between personal Christian insight, nature mysticism, and Scripture. It's cock crowing. Father of lights, what sunny seed, what glance of day hast thou confined into this bird? To all the breed this busy ray thou hast assigned. Their magnetism works all night, and dreams of paradise and light. And there's so much to unpack in that one stanza. I mean, it starts with Father of lights, which if you know your Bible, that is a quote from the Epistle of St. James 1:17, I believe it is. Father of lights, what sunny seed, what glance of day hast thou confined into this bird? And what he's talking about is, it's called cock crowing, right? Which you would think at first that it's about Peter and the cock crowing. It's not about that. What he's talking about is, and if you have chickens, as I do, in the summer in particular, where here in the summer the sun starts coming up around 5:30, around 3 o'clock, the rooster starts to crow, anticipating the rising of the sun, right? And that's what this is about. Is about intuition of the coming of the sun, or the coming of insight, or you know what I mean, the coming of Christ, right? And the whole thing, right? That what glance of day hast thou confined into this bird? I mean, this stupid bird. Chickens are dumb. Their magnetism works all night and dreams of paradise and light. The magnetism, the thing that attracts, right? So they're attracted to the rising of the sun, just like a Christian soul is attracted to the Easter, right? To the Easter mystery, you could say. So yeah, so Henry Vaughan, Silex, Scintillans. Can't go wrong with that one. The next one may be a little unconventional, but now the thing is, as I put in the title, these are Christian, mystical Christian treatises that won't make you a neurotic. Because so my doctorate is in this, and so while I was working on my doctorate, I made one of my professors, who was a medievalist, give me a course on medieval Catholic mysticism, or English mysticism, which is Catholic mysticism, which is, I wanted to see the antecedents to the kind of mysticism I would be exploring when I looked at the metaphysical poets, for instance. What was in the ground already? What was the environment like? You know, the spiritual and psychic environment in England at the time. And but then if you're, there's mysticism and there's mysticism. And I don't like the kind of mysticism that makes you neurotic. So, for instance, and you may disagree, and that's fine with me, because I don't care, I'm too old. But, so a lot of people, Orthodox people, but Catholics too, other people, really tend to like The Way of a Pilgrim. Which, when I read The Way of a Pilgrim, and you can get caught up in the rhetoric, right? Oh, this is beautiful. He's having this whole experience. Then you step back and you go, wait, how selfish can you get? Mysticism is about me, and my relationship to God. And it just strikes me as really selfish. I mean, here's this guy walking around just basically being a bum. Doesn't have any responsibilities. Doesn't have a family to take care of. Doesn't have a job. So that's not kind of spirituality. I, as a guy with 9 kids and a job, and paying the bills, I can't relate to that spirituality. Maybe it's good for some people. It ain't no good for me. Similarly, though I have less vitriol for it, Thomas Kempis's classic, The Imitation of Christ. Now, when I read that in my 20s, at first you're like, yeah, I'm getting close to Jesus. And then you're like, whoa. I can't do this. I live in the world. And the thing is, Thomas à Kempis did not write that for people who weren't in monastic vows. Right? And just similarly with even Thomas Aquinas, who's not mysticism, he wasn't writing for regular people to read. He was writing for theologians and for theology students. He was getting it all down, but as doctrine, but that's what he was writing for. He was not expecting to write a million seller. How many parchments would that be? So anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way, because let's not be neurotic. Speaking of other neurotic texts, I think two of the classic in the English tradition that a lot of people love, I don't, are the Book of Marjorie Kemp. What a neurotic she was. And again, it's all about her. And if you get these people, you get these mystics, and it's all about them, and I just want to slap them. The other one is Richard Rolla, or some people will say Richard Roll, The Fire of Love. Because, it's got a lot of interesting insights from prayer and meditation and stuff, but then you realize it's all about him. And he even has this one part where he would rather hear the singing in his heart than the noise from these monks chanting in the chantry. I'm like, you just stop. Just knock it off. Okay? So I have a very low-key approach to Christian mysticism. It's like a low intensity. Which brings me to my next one. The Carmina Gadelica, Hymns and Incantations, collected in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland in the last century by Alexander Carmichael. This one, I think, was published in several volumes, I think starting in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And what it is, it's like it says, hymns and incantations. Well, it's a lot of prayers too. That he just went around like people did in those days. You really gotta love appreciate what the Brothers Grimm and Alexander Carmichael and even William Butler Yeats, and I know I miss Cecil Sharp with folk music, went around collecting stuff before it disappeared. These prayers and songs and stories. And I just happened to open it up to one page. The kindling of the fire. This is one of the charms. I will raise the hearth fire as Mary would. The encirclement of bride and of Mary on the fire and on the floor and on the household all. And who are they on the bare floor? John and Peter and Paul. Who are they by my bed? The lovely bride and her fosterling. Who are those watching over my sleep? The fair loving Mary and her lamb. And who is near me? The king of the sun. He himself it is. Who is that at the back of my head? The Son of Life, without beginning, without time. That's a spirituality you can actually live with. It's not like the ortho bros always having a contest to see who can do the fast most intensely. It's like hanging around with weightlifters or something. I don't get it. So you're going to get screeds with me in between books, probably. Now, next up, another one of my patron saints, Novalis. German Romantic poet, probably the most important German Romantic poet by far. I mean, there were a lot of good German Romantics, but they know Novalis. Now, interestingly, so a few years ago, I was asked to write an introduction to Novalis's Christendom or Europe, an essay, and I was glad to do that because big hero of mine. And I forgot that his birthday was the day before mine in 1772. And I thought, wow, I should look up his astrology chart. So I looked up his chart, and it's, I was stunned at how much in common it had with mine. That does not mean I'm the reincarnation of Novalis, just to clean that up. But I was really stunned. And of course, maybe I can tell that's why the affinity is there. And it's very a sophiological text. And without getting into the whole thing, his fiancée, her name was Sophie, died. And she was young, and he was, I think it was only 23 or 24 when she died. And she was like 15. And he was just destroyed, this poor kid. And he had been reading, you can tell, Jakob Burma. And so he got infused with sophiology and Christian mysticism in that way. And there are parts of this poem that there's the blend of Sophie, his beloved, but also Sophia, the divine Sophia. And actually, where he used to go and look at the Sistine Madonna by Raphael on a regular basis and moved him extraordinarily. And so here's a little part. And what's cool about this, the Hymns to the Night, part is in verse and part is a prose poem, like an experiment in verse. And what the Romantics were interested in doing was breaking forms or stretching them to see what they could do, right? To not just be writing another Petrarchan sonnet. Just let's explode the expectations. And that's what he did. And so here's just from, which hymn is this? This is, I think it's the fourth hymn. That's the fifth hymn. Night became the mighty womb of revelations. The gods drew back into it and fell asleep, only to go out in new and more splendid forms over the changed world. Among the people who scorned all above too early maturity, and to whom the blessed innocence of the young had become stubbornly alien, the new world appeared, with features never seen before. In the poverty of the poetic tabernacle, a son of the first virgin and mother, unending fruit of mysterious embrace. I could go on, but I won't. extraordinary. And this translation is by Dick Higgins, which I do like quite a bit. There's another one out there, a couple out there. One's by Mabel Collins. I'm not crazy about that one. And even by George MacDonald, whom I like a lot, but I'm not crazy about the translation. Okay, next. Thomas Bromley, The Way to the Sabbath of Rest, or The Soul's Progress in the Work of the New Birth. This is a great moment, and this is a not as well known as it should be text from English mysticism. Now, Thomas Bromley was part of what later became known as the Philadelphian Society. These were a group of English Behmenists, meaning people who devotedly read the works of Jakob Böhme in the 17th century. And when he wrote this, I think that John Portage was still alive. John Portage was an Anglican priest who brought this teaching into England in a way and popularized. No, I shouldn't say popularized, but had kind of a community around him, which was devoted to Christ and Sophia. And they got away with it because it was during the English Civil Wars and people weren't paying attention. But Bromley was part of that group, and another important figure in that group came a little bit after Bromley. Jane Led, or sometimes Jane Lead. Different people pronounce it different ways. And she was extraordinary. She published, 18, 20 books. I did a chapter on her in my book as well, in my dissertation. And Bromley's, what's nice about his, it's short. And I don't think any of Jane Lead's works are in print, even in kind of crap reprints like this one, because they're very big and they're very unwieldy, but they're really insightful, especially her A Fountain of Gardens, which is a multi-volume work, or basically her spiritual diary, and recounts her mystical experiences of the Divine Sophia. But Bromley's book is it's short, beautiful, and actually in every chapter, I think, ends with a little poem. The soul which on the cross thus freely dies becomes to God a pleasing sacrifice. Through that eternal spirit in that blood, which by mere reason are not understood, nor by those rabbis who full wise would be, though they know not the true divinity. Okay, so I commend that one to you. If you can find, I wish, actually a guy I know, Nigel Smith, a scholar, I think he's still at Princeton, somebody gave him not a copy, an actual volume of Jane Lead's spiritual diary. So he's got the real McCoy. So good for him. Nigel, I don't think he watches, but Nigel, if you have it, and God bless you, man. Here's the next one. This is we can call this a non-typical work of Christian mysticism. It's an herbal, Christian herbal. Not even Christian. He doesn't say that word, but Nicholas Culpepper was a physician and herbalist, if you want to use the English pronunciation. And what's cool about this, and I use this quite a bit actually, finding out the different uses for the various herbs and plants in your vicinity. He's in England, of course, but a lot of what grows in England is growing where I live, in Michigan. So here, let's see what he just says at random about St. Peter's wort. Right? Let me give you a different one. Hold on. Let me give you a... Motherwort. That's one of my favorite ones because it grows like a weed. In fact, it is a weed. It grows all over the place here, and we always make a tincture of it. Amongst other things, he describes it, and then he says, it grows only in gardens and with us in England. Government and virtues. And this is what he does for a lot of things. Venus owns the herb, and it is under Leo. There is no better herb to take melancholy vapors from the heart, to strengthen it and to make it merry, cheerful, blithe soul than this herb. It may be kept in syrup or conserve. Therefore, the Latins called it cardiaca, meaning heart, right? Besides, it makes women joyful mothers of children and settles their wombs as they should be. Therefore, we call it motherwort. And he goes on. But that's the kind of thing you get in there. And why is that? Well, it's mysticism because it connects us spiritually to the world. Okay? And you can't beat that. Next. Now, of course, when you get a guy who does his doctorate in English mysticism, you're going to get a lot of English mysticism. Next one, Centuries by Thomas Traherne. And look, there's my name at the bottom, Introduction by Michael Martin. So I was more thrilled to write the introduction to this book than I'll publish just about any of my books. The Centuries. They're actually short meditations which he wrote and he did not finish because he died. He died at 37, I think, 35, 37. But he wrote these as spiritual counsel for a woman. And what's interesting with Traherne, unlike many of the clergymen of his day, and this is also something you see with John Portage and Thomas Bromley, there's not this overemphasis on sin, and there's almost nothing about hell, right? It's all about, for Thomas Traherne, it's becoming a child again. How do you enter the kingdom, right? And his insight, one of his famous poems, Wonder, how like an angel came I down, how bright are all things here, when first among his works I did appear, right? How do we recapture the vision of paradise that we had as children? Which I think children do. They, nature speaks to them, the world speaks to them, and everything's telling them about God. And according to Traherne, well, part of the reason is we had such a crummy education that bred that out of us. Right? And yeah, you cannot go wrong with Thomas Traherne. And he makes here's the thing, my problem with the Ortho Bros is they make Christianity sound so hard to do. I'm so happy, the same thing with a lot of trads, right? They just suck all the fun out of God. But Thomas Traherne returns it to you, which is that's why I call it a low-key spirituality, because it makes it easier on you. It's supposed to be easier on you, right? Doesn't Jesus say that? My yoke is light, right? It's supposed to be. No, I have to suffer. I was such a bad sinner. Oh, yeah, I know. Can we just not do that? Yeah, so Thomas Traherne, you can't go wrong. It's poetry, too. As I just quoted, it's poetry. Next up, I'm going to have, these books are going to fall in a second. I'm going to have a disruption. This is probably the only, Bromley is kind of sociological. The Pillar and Ground of the Truth. An essay in Orthodox Theodicy in 12 letters by Pavel Florensky. Florensky was, they call him the Da Vinci of Russia. He was a, polymath. He was a brilliant theologian, art critic, scientist, engineer. He designed the first electrical grid for Russia under communism, and they let him design the electrical grid. Then they sent him to the Gulag, and then they killed him because they kicked all the other Orthodox priests out of and then kicked all of them out. A lot of them. They kicked Florensky's friend Bulgakov out, and his other colleague Berjaev got kicked out on the philosophers' boats. He stuck around because he was valuable to the Russians, and once they got what they wanted from him, you're out. But this is an extraordinary book. It's written in the form of letters, each of which has an emblem at the beginning of the chapter. So here's the one, creation. So you can see there's an emblem, kind of like a 17th century type emblem. Clariscit Itero Claro, it shines in the clear light. And that's about creation, right? And creation, as we said, is one of the things that reveals God. And this is a really, it's just a wonderful book to read. You can tell by all my notes in here. Because this is probably 2021? 2022, 3 years ago. I was supposed to give a lecture at Cambridge University to, I can't remember, it's an Orthodox institute there, Institute of Orthodox Christian Studies. And I couldn't go because my mother, who was living with us at the time, was very ill. In fact, she died 2 months later. So I stayed home, but I gave the lecture on Zoom. But this is probably one of the, if you're going to look at sophiological texts of the Russian sophiologists, this is one of the key ones. Bulgakov has got some important ones as well. And I think probably The Bride and the Lamb, or the Lamb, I can't remember the name of the book, by Bulgakov, which I think is an extraordinary book too. But I think for me, the one that's more important to me is Florensky's, because it's more imaginative. It's less theological. There's a lot of theology in there, but Bulgakov was writing for theologians, and he was trying to toe the line. It didn't help. Got in a lot of trouble. And so the next, not the poetical works, but it is most of the poetical works of Robert Herrick. But I'm really interested in his book Hesperides. And he was an Anglican priest in Devon. When the parliamentarians came to power, they kicked him out of his living. And he basically wrote this big, messy book, Hesperides, or the works both human and divine of Robert Herrick, Esquire. And it's like a messy book, boy. It's like, what is it really about? It's about everything. And when I was studying this, and I write about this in my book, The Incarnation of the Poetic Word, that he's basically drawing a picture of the parish, because the parish is mess. It's messy. It's people, don't get along. People, because he's got epigrams like in Marshall's style, making fun of people. He's got all these. The spirituality that comes through in this book is very much of a Catholic pagan, like folk religion pagan, but even a little bit of Roman pagan religion. He's got prayers to the lares, the household spirits. And this is my spirituality, right? So it's connected to nature. It's connected to real life in the real world. And I always tell people, Robert Herrick is my spiritual pastor. Pardon me. And I'll read the argument of his book, his first poem. I sing of brooks of blossoms, birds and bowers, of April, May, of June, and July flowers. I sing of maypoles, hot carts, wassails, wakes, of bridegrooms, brides, and of their bridal cakes. You can't beat that, right? I wrote of youth, of love, and have access. By these to sing of cleanly wantonness. Cleanly wantonness, it's funny. I sing of dews, of rains, and piece by piece, of balm, of oil, of spice, and ambergris. I sing of times trans-shifting, and I write how roses first came red and lilies white. I write of groves of twilights, and I sing the court of Mab and of the fairy king. I write of hell, I sing and ever shall, of heaven, and hope to have it after all. That's it, baby. So yeah, he welcomes life. He probably, if you went to, you probably heard his poem in college, if they still teach it. To the virgins to make much, right? To make much of the day, right? Wow. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, right? That one. That's his. And that was probably, with the exception, and one book I probably should add to this, but I don't have a hard copy of it, is Eleanor Fargen's Trees, which I've talked about before. It's just like an extraordinary book. But I think when I wrote on Eleanor Fargen, and I wrote a chapter on Herrick and Nicholas Farrell. Those are probably the two most enjoyable writing projects I've ever taken on, because they're joyful. They're not so much theology. It's like a giant drag. Philosophy too. But those people were fun. Speaking of fun, here's another one: The Cloud of Unknowing by Anonymous. This is a late medieval text, right? And the thing is, now this is written by a monk or somebody living in a monastery. And he wrote it as spiritual direction. But unlike Thomas à Kempis or The Way of the Pilgrim, he's not laying heavy burdens on the person. He says, you know what? Just try to confine your contemplation to one word. And one syllable would be better than two syllables. Keep it simple. Like you could use the word love or God. Right? And he guides you through that, and you come into the cloud of unknowing. Right? You really enter into contemplation that way. This is what it is. And the best way I can describe that is you come into presence. Well, if you can still your mind. And in fact, I was out in my deer blind this morning, not stilling my mind very well. Kept racing from one thing to another. But the Cloud of Unknowing teaches you a very simple spirituality that does not place heavy burdens on you. You don't have to do 6,000 rosaries or anything. You just, very simple. And that was really helpful to read this and to see later how that kind of English spirituality shows up in a different iteration in Thomas Traherne, for instance. There's a little bit more struggle and anxiety with Henry Vaughan, because when he wrote the first part of Silex, Scintillans anyway, he was convalescing from being wounded in the Civil War. So he has his kind of issues with Oliver Cromwell, as do I. And so yeah, that's worth thinking about. And last but not least, I almost didn't include this one because I've done so much about it before, and people always want to talk to me about this book, Meditations on the Tarot by Valentin Tomberg, though it was published anonymously. Probably like the worst kept secret in esoteric Christian history. Now, I include this book because it's a pretty extraordinary book. Very extraordinary book. And when I read it the first time when I was about 23, it blew my head open because I realized I had a very narrow conception of what Catholicism is or what Christianity is. And he opened it up, which he said, the subtitle is A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. And so you can, but it's very different from the Hermeticism that you see in Henry Vaughan, which is, my own propensities be more like that. This is a Hermeticism that is also colored by the occult movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Eliphas Levi shows up a lot in here, He's a Catholic, a deacon. Rudolf Steiner, Tomberg had been a student of Rudolf Steiner's before he became Catholic. He was Russian. So he was really plugged into that Russian tradition of Sophiology. And actually, just like Florensky's book starts with an emblem and is in the form of letters, so is Tomberg's. He writes, "Dear unknown friend." He starts every letter like that, and he starts with the tarot card emblem at the top of the major arcana. It's really as some of the endorsements on the back. All these heavy hitting Catholics, right? Like Hans Urs von Balthasar, who wrote a foreword for the German edition, which is also in the Angelico Press version. Werner Schlepper, a Jesuit, wrote a review, and Basil Pennington. So, and here's what Balthazar said, a thinking, praying Christian of unmistakable purity reveals to us the symbols of Christian Hermeticism and its various levels of mysticism, gnosis, and magic, taking in also the Kabbalah and certain elements of astrology and alchemy. These symbols are summarized in the 22 so-called major arcana of the tarot cards. By way of the major arcana, the author seeks to lead meditatively into the deeper, all-embracing wisdom of the Catholic mystery. Now, a lot of people might be might have alarm bells go off. I wasn't one of them, and I'm still not one of them. But it's probably one of the more important works of, we could call it mysticism, I guess, of the 20th century. I'd say, him, Florensky, Bulgakov. Who else would I put on? Von Balthazar. It's up there. That's top tier. It's top tier. But anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you today. So, and I'm sure I left out your favorite books. And feel free to drop whatever those might be in the comments. And with that, I will see you next time. Have a good time.